Cruising right along in lecture 13, we're now in part 2. Last time I was explaining the three main unifying characteristics that postmodernism seems to have: pluralism, internationalism, and appropriation. At this point, we're going to take a closer look at that quality of pluralism. Remember, it's a plurality of viable artistic directions. If we look back into the 1960s, when mainstream art criticism dominated the New York art world, I said that there was some concept called objectness and objecthood, where the art object was the only thing a person was supposed to think about when they stood in front of the art object. It's not supposed to be thoughts about the artist or about nature or anything else. It was all packed in to that purified, distilled presence of the art object. Well, let's look at this. So it's New York modernism in the 1960s. We're in a gallery and we have two minimalist works on the wall there, and we're looking at this quality, objectness, objecthood. It's all about the art object, how it is distilled, how art in mainstream art criticism during the 1960s, this is a quiz question, was how art was distilled into a pure object with no other reference outside of it. Remember all that stuff with post-painterly abstraction? And the reason why that was pure object, the reason why that was, it's because the art object was for sale, and they were making money from it, and they wanted it to simply be all about the commodity, the art object that could be purchased in a gallery, and consequently everybody makes a lot of money except maybe the owner, but they could resell it. So the thing is, we have right around 1970 a whole bunch of artists who were really outside of this closed system. They weren't part of the gallery world, and they did not have supporting art critics, and they were really upset about how much money these purified art objects were going for. They didn't think much about the art objects to start out with post-painterly abstraction and primary structures. So what we have right around 1970 is a rebellion on the part of the art world there in New York City. And what was the rebellion about? It was against the art object, the art commodity. And the strategy that this rebellion took was interesting. It was the dematerialization of the art object. They said, well, look, if it's all about the art object that's being sold in these galleries, well, let's make art that really isn't part of that commodity, of that commercial world. Let's make art that's not simply an object. In post-painterly abstraction during the 1960s, the art object generally was either painting or sculpture, like post-painterly abstraction paintings and those primary structures that we see on the bottom there. Well, then these rebellious artists decided, well, let's stop making paintings and let's stop making sculpture. So starting right around 1970, so in the 1970s, we started to see, and here's a quiz question, the dematerialization of the art object. And we have new art forms coming online that are neither paintings nor sculpture. So it was a real inventive expansion, exploration of what a work of art can be. And that's part of this plurality of viable artistic directions. What we're going to do is look at some of the main ones. For example, it's really in the 1970s that performance art becomes a thing, a popular option in the art world. And here We have a famous example by a guy named Chris Burden with the performance piece entitled Shoot, and it's from 1971. So it's very early in this postmodern process. And there is Mr. Burden against the wall. You see how far his arm is extended? Because he's asked a friend to take a rifle, aim steadily and carefully, and shoot his arm. Hence the title, Shoot. Yeah, and there's a very stunned Chris Burden right after the performance piece. And, he's bleeding there, and he's wondering, don't tell my mother, okay, that I did this. Christopher there is not going to go out on the road with his performance piece to Jersey and Connecticut and Iowa and places like that. He did it once, and he's lucky that he survived it, right? So how do you make a living being a performance artist? It's this way. It's through photography. Photographs document the performance piece. So photographic documentation becomes critical in the 1970s because of performance art. And here's a quiz question, photography, consequently, was taught for the first time in art programs during the 1970s because of performance art. So when you go to a gallery, you don't actually see Chris being shot up, but rather you see the photographs on the wall, original photographs that you can buy, and it's considered an extension, a byproduct of the work of art. He also gets royalties from the publication of his shoot when books use it as an image to illustrate performance art. So that's how you make money, photography. Let's advance in time. That's the origin of performance art during the 1970s. But it is going strong and heavy in postmodernism. We're all the way in France now. So this is an example of internationalism in postmodernism. And we're looking at an artist that calls herself Orlan. And she has used plastic surgery to modify her body. And you can sort of, make that out if you look at her temples up there. And she does that in order to assume these different roles in works of art. She uses makeup, body modification, and also manipulation of digital images to assume the identity of non-Western, non-mainstream artwork. So here's another example of appropriation. And I show you Orlan just to show you the extent that performance art has gone from its very beginnings, a rifle, shot in the arm, to a very elaborate scheme of adopting the body, because in performance art, the body becomes your found object. You're working with that and really nothing else. So with Orlan, it shows you the extension of this experiment in performance art. Here's another thing. Today, feminist artists really use their body, laying claim and control over their own body to make their political and artistic and social statements. So performance art, in other words, is going very strong in postmodernism. It's a viable art form. And it is another reason, it is the main reason that photographic documentation is essential to the art world during postmodernism. Another new art form that comes on board during the 1970s is video art. And again, the context of all of this is Greenberg and other art critics are no longer around telling the public and the art world which direction to go in if you want to make important art and be discovered. So these artists are really, in this artistic think tank trying to come up with new art forms that are neither painting nor sculpture. And video art was really an untapped source to explore. And here we have Nam June Paik, who is a South Korean artist, as one of the main pioneers in video art. And here with TV Buddha, we have a Buddha statue with a closed-circuit camera trained on him, and then the Buddha is actually watching himself in this really cool-looking television set there. So it could be the ultimate couch potato, just watching yourself sit there, or it could be an exercise in, self-enlightenment and inner contemplation of one's existence. Take it either way, it's a start in video art. It's also an example of internationalism. Again, he's from South Korea. Yeah, important art and exploration and pioneers are coming up all across the globe during postmodernism. You do not have to be a New Yorker. Let's fast forward in time further into postmodernism and go to Florence, Italy, and look at an American artist, video artist, named Bill Viola. And there in Florence, you have a retrospective exhibit of his work, and it's called the Electronic Renaissance. And retrospective exhibit means it's a collection of his famous art pieces, his video art pieces that he produced during his career. So it's not just one show of most recent work, it's a look back through his entire career. And that it's in Italy, the birthplace of the Italian Renaissance, highlighting the contributions, the postmodern contributions of an American, again shows you the international flavor of the postmodern period. Internationalism. So you go into this famous Florentine palace, the Palazzo Strozzi, and you walk past real Michelangelo statues, and you can see these huge video images on the wall there playing out these pieces that Viola, has created. We're looking at one from 2002 that was included in this retrospective exhibit, and it's called Emergence, and it's all about religious imagery and appropriation. Here you have two women by a tomb, and this is actually quoting the Marys by the tomb of Jesus. So here, they are despondent, dejected, lost, bewildered, confused. It's like, the nadir of human emotion and psychological state. But suddenly, in the video, there's a stirring in this tomb, and it becomes a well of water, representing a baptism in a new birth, the emergence. And you see this very pale colored nude male slowly, and I mean slowly, start to emerge from the tomb that is now this well of water. And of course, the women now are energized because they are no longer lost without their companion, but they respond in delight and joy that something miraculous is happening before their eyes. Finally, the man stands up and the women take him out of this receptacle and place him on the floor. And there they cover his body. And now you've gone through all of these emotional states in about a 5-minute period that these women, that, surrogately, we or vicariously, we go along with these emotional states as we watch the women's body language and reaction to this emerging figure. Here is a very clear example of appropriation in postmodernism, because Viola, who is a very spiritual artist, frequently taps into that religious Christian tradition in Western art. And you can see the similarities between Viola's video piece and the painting, which is an Italian Renaissance painting, there on the left. You have the Christ figure flanked by two other figures. And here, if you go into the exhibit in 2017, you could see this comparison, even more vividly illustrated because the actual Renaissance painting is on the wall next to Viola's video piece. Hey, if you didn't make it to the Florentine exhibit, maybe you can go to Worcester's Art Museum sometimes, because there is a really fascinating example of a powerful video art in the Worcester Art Museum. And it's called Union, and it's a video diptych. We've seen the diptych format before, and usually it's associated with religious imagery, so he's appropriating that very format of the diptych arrangement. And we see an example up there on the upper right. In the video diptych, even though these two figures look like they're in the same space, they're not. They're actually separated in isolated and separate rooms. There's two cameras and two spaces. One is of an older female, and the other is, a son, her son, right around the year, the age 30, 33, something like that. And even though they are not in the same space, the mother, hence the title Union, the mother senses all of the emotions, torments, psychology that her son is experiencing. So it's like it's a spiritual, psychological, unbreakable connection the mother has with the son. And the son increasingly goes through this very agitated, contorted body language, and the mother experiences every step of the pain that her son is walking through. Another clear example of appropriation in Viola's artwork. Again, modernism encourages artists to look back through the rich library of artwork and appropriate from that treasure trove aspects that would help clarify the meaning of their own work. In this case, he's tapping into this Christian tradition in art that the Virgin Mary, the mother of Jesus, went through a parallel passion as her son went through his passion during his last hours on earth. And you can see in this Flemish painting from the 15th century how the mother's body language conforms to this swooping collapse of the Christ figure as he's removed from the cross, and similarly the Virgin swoons because she's experiencing this loss of life, not her own, but her son's life. And it's a very beautiful, vivid connection between, again, it's like an unbreakable, everlasting connection between the mother and the child. Again, it's union, and he's appropriating, tapping into that religious imagery to bring home the main point. Mother and child go through the pain together. Okay, let's pick up this lecture next time in part 3, and I have no idea why Homer is dreaming about Orlan.